I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Kim. Now I'll ask George Eistetter to the floor mic to recite the four-way test, and then we'll show a video of the four-way test speech contest second place winner. Recall, we saw the first place winner a couple weeks ago. George?
And in case you don't remember, we repeat each sentence after me till we're done. First, is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Second, is it fair to all concerned?
Is it fair to all concerned?
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
And will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you. You got an A.
The clock is ticking. The World Wildlife Fund states that if nothing is done about climate change by 2030, the damage done to our planet will be irreversible. And while actions like recycling can make some impact, we must shift the onus of action onto industries that produce much larger amounts of pollutants and urge them to invest in climate change solutions. As we assess this approach, we can apply the four-way test to determine our best route. The first question, is it the truth? The overwhelming role that large companies play in climate change is a definite truth. The Guardian found that just 100 companies produce 71% of the world's carbon emissions, an ocean to the drop of individual carbon footprints. Secondly, is it fair to all concerned? CEO-led coalitions have reported that on average, only 0.13% of corporate revenue is spent on environmental initiatives, and this simply is not fair. To remedy this, larger companies should pay their fair share in fighting climate change. Finally, we ask two final questions. Will this build goodwill and better friendships, and will this be beneficial to all concerned? Acting against climate change isn't just a political movement. It is a mandate to save the planet and save the people living on it. Any significant step towards addressing climate change is a significant benefit for the entire world and will improve relations between individuals and the corporate world. Fighting climate change must happen now and in an equitable fashion. As Steve Irwin once said, if we save our wild places, we will ultimately save ourselves.
Thank you, George. Thank you for that. Also, thank you to the Vocational Services Committee who charged forward and put on the four-way speech contest this year. I'd also like to thank Browning Kuzno as June's weekly meeting sponsor. Thank you, Brent Kuzno. And some updates. Well, folks, we did it. In person in this Rotary year. Unbelievable. It's only been 64 weeks since we met in person last. That's well over a year if you're doing the calculation. I want to thank all those who made this possible. Again, it took a team to move this mountain, and I appreciate every one of you. Okay, so a couple other items. Remember, on June 24th, from 4:30 to 7 o'clock, we have a member engagement event. It is at the Museum of the Great Lakes. It is our first member engagement meeting in person in a very long time. So please join us. More to come on that in the next coming meetings. Also, at the end of this meeting, we have a special segment for everybody. It's a video from It's a Ball. We used to raise a lot of money during our It's a Ball events, and it is, well, I'm not going to give it away, okay? We'll let Chuck show it, and I think everybody will appreciate it. So if we run over a little bit, please bear with us. It's Chuck's fault. Another item I want to mention, our foundation gave a grant to the V Project for $10,000 to be used to assist in the door-to-door canvassing. Efforts in a lot of the zip codes for the areas that we serve. So the release will go out this week to the media, You might hear more about it in the coming days, and I just wanted to mention that. And now, here to provide us with an update on the annual campaign is past President Tom Backoff.
Thank you, President Alex. You all look beautiful. Oh my gosh, you haven't aged a bit. You haven't gained a pound since the last time we saw one another. So it is terrific to be here. Alex, your leadership through this, really outstanding. Round of applause, Alex. It truly is my pleasure on behalf of the Rotary Club of Toledo Foundation trustees to give you an update on our annual campaign. So this will be our final update for the year. As you might remember, we began our campaign back in November. We had a couple of goals. First goal was to raise $80,000 this year. We felt we had to get to 80. When we ended last Rotary year, our contributions had come under $70,000. So to get back on track, to allow our foundation committees to be able to grant gifts at the pace of $200,000 a year, we had to get back up. And I am pleased to report that as of last week, we have raised a total of $82,966.93. So your generosity came through. We exceeded our goal by almost $3,000. So that was terrific. Our second goal was to increase participation. Try to get each member to give each year. Over the past 7 years, our participation in gifts to the foundation has averaged 63%. So just under 2/3 of Rotarians giving each year. Our highest in those 7 years was 72%, and that was in 2014 and 15. To help us get back to that higher level, that 2014, 2015, we had 2 generous Rotarians offer an incentive with a challenge grant. If you remember back in December, a Rotarian offered us an incentive with a challenge grant of $10,000 if we could achieve 50% participation by the end of the year. And thank you all for responding. We hit that goal and we were able to take advantage of that $10,000 grant. So we were at 50% in January. Well, we had gotten most of the low hanging fruit at that point. So we knew to get higher participation, it might need a little more incentive. So we had another Rotarian step forward in the spring and offer another $10,000 grant if we could achieve 75% participation by the end of May. Well, Rotarians, I have never been so excited to tell you that last week we got 2 more donations. We are now over 75% participation. So thanks to your generosity, we've added an additional $20,000 to the foundation. So that will go a long, long way. I want to say personal thank yous to Foundation Chair Mary Mancini, President Alex, and Executive Director Kathy Tate, who just did an amazing job keeping me inspired during the last 12 months of the campaign. Also to the club board of directors and the foundation trustees who sent emails and made phone calls throughout the campaign to encourage us to give. And of course, thank you to those generous Rotarians that provided those $10,000 challenge grants. Most of all, thanks to all of you, your generosity, your commitment to Rotary, your dedication, the hard work of our foundation advisory committees that make all this possible. And once again, you've proven to us all that you make this club, our club, one of the finest Rotary clubs in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. That is great news, phenomenal news. I want to thank every single Rotarian that helped out making these contributions to the foundation. Again, to also, and most importantly, are the matches. Everybody rose to the occasion. I mean, it's your contributions that allow our club to make such generous grants to local 501c3s. And finally, I'd like to ask Keith Burwell to come to the podium, not the floor mic. I just figured introducing the speaker from the floor mic just doesn't cut it. And especially since it's Keith Burwell speaking. And Keith is going to introduce today's speaker.
As you've been told, our speaker today is Ted Long. I've known Ted, oh Lord, 15 plus years. He has a beautiful family, but let me begin by telling you Ted's fatal flaw. He doesn't know how to say no. And this is why. He's the current Chief Operating Officer of Managed Care Advisory Group. Before that, and currently a council member for the Forbes Business Council, which is an exclusive group that you're invited to. He was a managing principal before that of North Shore Strategies and a board of directors member of Internet Payment Exchange. He was a principal and national practice leader at Finley Davies. And before that, a founder and chief executive officer of Digital Horizon. Now, if all that business background is not enough, on his volunteer side, he's been on the board of directors of the Lucas County Courthouse Preservation Alliance, which is currently going on. He's been on the executive board of the Erie Shores Boy Scouts Council, a member of the trustees of the Toledo History Museum, steering committee and content contributor to Toledo's Attic, past board chair of the Toledo Cultural Arts Center, past vice chair of the executive committee and executive committee member of the Toledo Arts Commission, past president of the Kiwanis Club, and Ted will let that one pass. Past vice president and trustee of the Old Newsboys Goodfellow Association, co-founder of the Libby House Foundation, co-investor and founder of the Toledo Community Venture Partners at the Greater Toledo Community Foundation, which now is known as Spark. And if he does all that volunteer work and he has any other time, he evidently does, because he has written a book called Forgotten Visitors, which came out in 2020 through the University of Toledo Press. And now, because he's not going to sit still, his new book, 100 Things to Do in Toledo Before You Die. Now, that's all his great background. I can also tell you he's fun to go hunting with, fun to go fishing with. Just a fun guy all the way around. And I think when he says there's 100 things you need to do, they're not going to be boring things to do, knowing this gentleman. So Ted, if you'll come and talk.
Thank you, Keith. Appreciate that introduction. It is one of my flaws, actually, that I can't learn to say no and end up with this long list of volunteer things that I do in the community, but I've always enjoyed everything I've done in the Glass City. And I tell people, moved here 35 years ago from Chicago. My wife and I, that we were recruited here, they put us up in the Sofitel at the time. There was a party in the park. Promenade Park was full of people. We went back to Chicago, told everybody we're moving to Toledo. They all looked at us like we were nuts. We thought we'd stay a couple of years, and 35 years later, we've had multiple chances to leave, and we'd never leave. This is home for us. So appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. Keith and I go back, I think we were members of the 2005 Leadership Toledo class. And that's what kind of dragged me into the whole local history scene. I've always been a history buff. I tell people I'm not a historian. I'm a storyteller, curator. But in 2005, Keith and I and 55 other people were on a bus pulled up in front of the Libby House. Ted Ligabell was giving this incredible tour, and he told us that the Libby House was for sale and likely would be turned into apartments. And I was up front because I wanted to be close to the speaker. You know, I was really into it, geeking on all the history. And I said something like, how can we let that happen? And he said, well, why don't you do something about it? And so I took the challenge. And as Keith mentioned, I co-founded the Libby House Foundation. We bought the house, and that group is still in charge today, working towards making that a venue that I think this community can be very proud of down the road. So that turned into another gig as well. After that year, Ted got busy with a lot of the work he was doing up at Eastern Michigan, and I took on the regional tour, and I became the host for Leadership Toledo. So over the last 15 years, I've taken 55 people on a bus tour of the region, learned a lot about the history, the stories, and also led on to the things I'm going to tell you about today. As Keith mentioned, I've been busy the last year, and John Federke actually reached out and said, people might be interested in you sharing what you've been up to. 2 books that I've had published in the last 8 months. The first one is, Keith mentioned, was Forgotten Visitors. That was published by University of Toledo Press in November. And it's a compilation of about 25 stories of various people who visited Toledo over the last 200 years. And I purposely picked people you'd hear of and people you probably never heard of, but they had a backstory to the visit, which is what I really enjoyed telling in the book. I also published 100 Things to Do in Toledo Before You Die. I did not make up the title, so don't hold me responsible for that. It's actually a series of books. There's about 50 of these books around the country through Reedy Press out of St. Louis, and I'll get into some details about that. I'm also working on GPS-based voice tours, audio tours, where you download an app to your phone and then get in your car or go on a walk. Because with the GPS technology available today, I know exactly where you're at, and I start to tell you everything that's around you and the history that goes with that. We're also employing voice actors. So in the case of, we'll talk about it later, but we just did one for Fort Meigs, in which we have the journals being read by the soldiers who were there by voice actors. So as you're experiencing Fort Meigs, you're also experiencing what it was like in the eyes of those soldiers. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Forgotten Visitors was about a 1.5-year project for me. Spent a lot of time down at the main library, 3rd floor, local history, and in the back room, going through the microfilm of old newspapers to gather up the information that I needed. The book itself, interestingly, came to me really by accident. Yarko Cook, who is the managing editor for Toledo Press, was a fan of my blog, holytoledohistory.com. And he reached out one day and he said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And deep down, I always wanted to write a book, but I wasn't sure what I'd write about. And within a couple of weeks of that conversation, I was reading a New York Times backstory about Wyatt Earp. And in it, it described how Jack Dempsey, in his biography, talked about climbing into the ring at the Willard Dempsey fight in July 4th of 1919. And he looked out into the crowd and he saw Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp taking guns from the crowd at the event. And these 2 gentlemen were actually in town for the fight, obviously. Masterson was a journalist for a New York newspaper, a sports columnist, and Wyatt Earp was just become a boxing fan. He'd actually refereed a boxing match the year earlier. And so when they saw these ruffians in the audience, they got these 2 gentlemen to go in and kind of take over and take their weapons away. So Dempsey's standing in the middle of the ring looking out, and here's these 2 taking the weapons away from people in the crowd. The other person who was there was this woman. This is Ethel Barrymore. She was actually in what was called the Jenny Wren section. This was a section that was roped off with barbed wire to keep the ruffians out for the women who wanted to watch the fight. She was a boxing enthusiast, but this fight was so brutal, she never went to a boxing match again afterwards. The book itself is interesting in that, you look it up, you open the book and you look at the chapters and you see the names, you go, this is interesting. For me, what's much more interesting are the faces of the different people that are featured in the book. When you look at it, it's very eclectic, it's very broad, and each has their own backstory of why they were in Toledo. I want to talk today about this gentleman, Samuel Clemens, or Mark Twain. He visited Toledo in January of 1869. And Twain has a really, really interesting story, and one that I didn't know about and I stumbled into when I started to do the research. We're lucky that Twain at the time was engaged to this woman. His future wife, and at the time his fiance, and Olivia, or Liv as he called her, was someone he wrote to every day. So we have those letters, and it gives us really good insight into what Twain was thinking about, particularly before he arrived in Toledo. And in those letters, it's clear he was scared to death of coming to Toledo. He was nervous. He was panicked about coming to Toledo, Ohio. In a minute, I'll explain why, but I want to just kind of give you some background on the tour itself. By this time, Twain had started, his his foray into Mississippi steamboats. He had then been a gold miner. He became a writer, and now he reached a point by the 1869, he had written his famous Jumping Frogs of Calaveras County. And so he was building his name, but he was also building out a reputation with newspapers. He would convince them to pay him to go on a cruise, and then he would write about it. 1867, he went to the Sandwich Islands. Today we call it Hawaii. And he wrote a whole piece about it, was paid for by a newspaper. And then in 68, he did the Mediterranean and the Mideast. And this was paid for by the San Francisco newspaper he was working for, and it became the American Vandal Abroad. And this became his big opportunity to become a lecturer. He hadn't been on the lecture circuit yet on a big way. He had done some small lectures in California, but now he was about to really hit it big time. This is the lecture circuit he did from November 68 to March of 69. When you look at it geographically, you know, it's pretty impressive, but then when you look at it this way, it had to have been grueling. I mean, look at this, one night after next. This is a person who's traveling by train, and he is just hitting town after town after town, you know, making his presentation. And as I said before, Toledo shows up on January 20th. Leading up to Toledo, we get all these letters where he's talking about how nervous he is about going to Toledo. We know that he arrived in Toledo on the Toledo Wabash and Western. And I love this little ad. If you look down there at the bottom, I'm not sure if you guys can see it. It shows the names of the officers of the company, including Mr. Booty. And I always have to remind people that's B-O-O-D-Y, Booty, who the Booty House was named after. And he was chairman and president of the railroad at the time. And then on the lower right-hand side, you can see the name of the actual freight agent. And that's where Twain stayed that night, was the house of the freight agent for this railroad. And he wrote back, he said, "I am handsomely housed here with friends John B. Carson and family, pleasant folks, and their home is most elegantly appointed. They are bright and happy as can be." Their home was located on Superior in what today would be the Warehouse District. So Twain, you know, may be nervous, but he's living large in a nice home over on Superior with the Carson family. The one thing I learned in doing the research for this was that the Toledo never had a really impressive venue before 1871. So where did Mark Twain and all these other people who came here, where did they speak? They spoke in halls. Toledo was a city of halls at that time. There was Stickney Hall, there was White's Hall, the College Hall, and these were just, most of them, rooms above retail shops where they would either, you know, take out all the tables and have a ballroom for a ball, or put tables and chairs and have a speaker come in or an act come in. It wasn't until 1871 that the Wheeler Opera House was built. Jeff Wheeler's and the family built the Wheeler Opera House, and it was an incredible venue. Unfortunately, it burned down about 20 years later. And then that's when Mr. Ketchum came in and built the opulent Victorian Valentine Theater and named it in honor of his father. So that was something I learned. I never thought about it, but you know, where were people when they came to Toledo? Where would they present at? In this particular case, it was the White's Hall. And White's Hall was located above New Housel Brothers retail store. So the first two floors here were actually retail, and this was kind of like a Titke's. They had everything from hardware to women's clothing. And so that they took up the first two floors, and then the hall was up on the third floor, and that's where Twain spoke. This was actually located at the corner of Summit and Oak Street. Anybody know where that is now? This would be where 4 Seagate sits. Oak Street was renamed to Jackson. So this sits roughly where we know 4 Seagate sits today. This is the reason that Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens was fearful of coming to Toledo. This is David Roslock, better known as Petroleum v. Nasby. And Nasby, by this time, owns the Toledo Blade, is probably the most popular humorist and journalist in the country. And Twain knows that the people of Toledo understand humorists. They understand how someone can write something and twist something and still make a point and be funny at the same time. So he's completely panicked about having to come to Nasby's town and make a speech and be compared to him. So luckily for Twain, he hits it out of the ballpark. Toledo Blade prints this wonderful review. And I did not bring my reading glasses, and it's hard for me to read from up here, but I think it basically, if you can see it from where you're at, it says that Mark Twain is a success as a lecturer, as well as a writer. We think no one who heard The American Vandal Abroad last night will dispute. I mean, they were blown away, and they said that he had tickled the audience in a way no one had ever seen before. The Toledo commercial, same thing. They thought he did a splendid job. They said there was originality and pungency to his wit, and purity of tone and expression, which gives it relish to the most cultivated minds. Twain was a massive hit when he came to Toledo, despite his fear of what he was up against with Nasby. He wrote, and for some reason these slides are on a timer, and they're taking off on me, so I'm dealing with that right now. He wrote to his girlfriend, his future wife and fiance lived that night. He literally left the hall, went to the hotel, and wrote that it was splendid tonight. The guests were crowded, the hall was crowded full of the pleasantest and handsomest people, and I did the very best I possibly could and did it better than I ever did before. He was really feeling good about what he had pulled off. The next day, he's feeling even better about it, but he explains to her that, by the way, she's up in Elmira, New York. He could have come up and seen her for 24 hours before the Toledo show, but he says he couldn't have done it, and he said because the long trip back to Toledo would have about finished me and left me unfit to attack Nasby's fellow citizens. So this was getting into his mind. It was definitely playing a mind game on him. Then 2 days after that, he's feeling his oats. Now it's all behind him. Now he's writing a letter to his agent and some of the other people that work for him back in East. And he says, shall be in Hartford about March and then make a flying trip to California. I swept Nasby's dunghill like a besom of destruction. I don't know what a besom of destruction is, but it's a noble sort of expression. And he says, came off with flying colors, print the notices for me, lots, love to all, 4 of you. Yes, always, Mark. So by now, he's beating his chest. He's feeling really good about what he pulled off in Toledo. And notice too, by the way, all the letters to Liv are signed Sam. Letters to folks like this, he signs Mark for Mark Twain. So the Toledo connection here, this was a great research project for me to go down this rabbit hole. You know, I knew Mark Twain was here, but I had no idea of, the backstory. So it was pretty cool. Interestingly, within a month of this, he meets up with his nemesis and they become drinking buddies. They actually go on the speaking circuit together, become fast friends. This is a picture of Nasby, Twain, and this is Josh Billings, another humorist at the time. And this was taken about 2 months after the speech in Toledo. What happens? David Ross Locke offers Mark Twain a position at the Toledo Blade. And, you think to yourself, what would have happened if that had happened? Well, let's see what happens. He turned him down. Late in March, he wrote to his mother. His mother had written him a letter. His brother was having financial difficulties, and she was asking for his help. And he said, my head is so busted up with my own endeavors to get my own plan straight that I am hardly in condition to fix up anybody else's. I don't know whether I'm going to California in May. I don't know whether I want to lecture next season. And I don't know whether I want to yield to Nasby's persuasions and go with him on the Toledo Blade. And he goes on to say, I don't know anything. I'm too happy and too comfortable and sleepy now to know anything, and I don't care a damn. Notice how he spells damn, D-A-M. He never swore in front of his mother. So he used to spell words different ways so it wouldn't come off as a swear word. So Twain turns down Nasby's offer. to Toledo's loss, but I'm sure to the world's gain, because now we have all these incredible pieces that he wrote. I don't know if that would have happened if he had come to Toledo and spent time as a journalist at the Blade. I also write several pieces about famous women and not so famous women who visited Toledo. Sarah Bernhardt over here, you see on the left, and then Stanton and Anthony, who came here as part of the women's rights movement. Toledo was a big part of the women's rights movement. But I want to talk about the woman who's in the middle, who I'm sure most of you have never heard of. And now guys, can we go to the next slide? This is Blanche Scott. Anybody ever heard of Blanche Scott? Good. This is why I picked Blanche. I hope to be able to teach you guys something about somebody maybe you've never heard of. Blanche Scott is from Rochester, New York. She grew up in a very nice home. Family was well off. Her dad, I think, was in the milling business. Was famous around Rochester. She was a skateboard artist, believe it or not, and a bike artist. She used to do bike tricks as a kid. Her dad bought her a Cadillac runabout when she was 14. And people in Rochester said she would be bombing down the street with her flaming red hair going behind her, and she just had a blast in her little roundabout. This would be around that turn of the century. She loved automobiles. She was a tomboy. Her mother was scared what was going to happen next. She sent her to 2 finishing schools and Vassar. She graduates from Vassar, and what does she do? She moves to New York City and becomes the first female car salesperson in the country. She knew the automobile was going to be the next thing, and she wanted to be part of it. She's in the business, and she writes to this gentleman named John North Willis, or Willies, as we call him here in Toledo all the time. And she suggests to him, I want to drive from New York to California, and I want to drive an overland, and I want you to sponsor me. And she had no idea whether he'd accept. He did. And he put her in the overland, gave her his whole PR crew. And this is a picture of her arrival in Toledo in 1910. I love this photo. Look at the kids' faces. They're just like in awe. Who is this woman? And then check out the car. It's, it was specially built for her, had its own separate portable toilet. When she was asked once by a press person, do you have a male mechanic? And she said, I can fix anything a mere man can fix. She was that kind of person. I love Blanche. So she makes the trip from New York to California. She's actually not the first person to do it. And Overland knew that, but they didn't care because they were going to get so much PR out of it. That she stopped at every Overland dealership she could. She stopped at Indianapolis in the month of May and actually drove a couple of cars around the track. It was huge. And she drove, trying to think of the race car drive, Barney Oldfield's car, which was just incredible that he let her drive his car, but it was good stuff. She makes it to California, and now she decides she has an interest in flying. And she takes flying lessons from Glenn Curtis. And this is actually a shot of what it looked like to take flying lessons back then. You couldn't put 2 people on a plane back then. So you'd sit in the person taking the lesson would sit in the plane, and the instructor would stand outside, and they would call it grass mowing. They put a governor on the engine so it wasn't going fast enough to take off, and the guy instructing would run next to you and yell at you what to do with the instruments. This is how they learned how to fly. Well, one day while Blanche was doing some grass mowing, the wind came from the opposite direction, and she lifted off. Glenn Curtis almost had a heart attack. I mean, it was like, this is all I need. This woman's going to come down, get crashed and killed, and everybody will blame Glenn Curtis. She lands the plane and basically tells him, let's get this governor off the engine and let me fly. I'm ready. And she wrote in her biography, unpublished biography, she said, 2 days later, I asked Curtis to take the governor off the engine, and he finally agreed. I stepped into that little old 35 horsepower ship, waved a flippant goodbye, and took right off and flew around the field and made a good landing. I have never found that any woman antedated that flight. Now, this should have been the first solo flight for a woman in the world, actually. But the group that was in charge actually received something from somebody else the day before. And so Blanche never got credit for being the first woman to solo flight. Eventually, she became the first woman to solo flight in front of a public audience. She did that in Fort Wayne. And here's some material about that. And it was a huge news story when she did that. She flew in front of a crowd of 10,000 people in Fort Wayne. They just packed an old horse racing place, and she flew 25 feet off the ground, and everyone thought they'd just seen, you know, the greatest thing in the world. She eventually becomes a barnstormer and joins a bunch of other pilots. Over the years, she starts to feel a little bit more negative about the whole aeronautics thing, because she realizes most people are coming to see crashes than they are coming to see her. And she's had several friends die. And she finally, at the death of this one friend, just gives it up, says, I can't do it anymore. It's not what I really got into this for. And so now where do you think she goes? Here's the Toledo connection. She marries this man. This is Harry Tuttle. Harry Tuttle was her PR man with Overland. He traveled with her on the cross-country excursion. He was a race car driver. He was also a PR guy for John North Willis. They marry and they move to Dayton. And that wedding or marriage lasted less than a year. And she wrote, I discovered I was totally unsuited for the life of bridge, telephoning, socials, and social visiting. The great big world was out there. And there were other things that I wanted to be done that were a damn right more important than who trumped Charlie's ace or who fell into the punch bowl at the country club. And don't you love the title she gave her biography? First woman to fly, and she titles it Not on a Broomstick. She had a great sense of humor. I'd love to have met this woman. After the marriage, she goes into the movie business. You know, cars, aviation, what's next? Movies. So she ends up becoming a screenwriter, mostly for comedic movies for RKO and Warner Brothers. And she does this for about 20 years. She eventually lands back in the aviation business and ends up back in Dayton as a curator for the Air Force Museum. And this is a shot from the late 40s. She's at an air show and she's wearing this special hat, and that hat signifies her membership in the first 5 females to fly club. They all wore a hat with a certain pattern to identify themselves. When she passed away, she was a member of the National Women's Hall of Fame and the Aviators Hall of Fame. And that was Blanche Scott, who many of us never heard of, who visited Toledo in 1910. Probably her biggest thing was in the late 20th century, the US government issued a stamp in her honor. So that's Forgotten Visitors. I'm gonna try to stay up with this. Forgotten Visitors is available through UT Press, and you can also get to it at my website, which is www.holytoledohistory.com. The book that was just published this spring is 100 Things to Do in Toledo. I mentioned this was a series of books done around the country. I was just basically hanging out about a year and a half ago and got a phone call from a publisher in St. Louis at Reedy Press. And they said, we've done all these books, you know, Atlanta, San Francisco, Charleston, and we want to start doing the mid-market. We found your website and you look like you know something about Toledo. Do you want to write this book? And I was like, oh, you know, sure. I don't have anything else to do right now. And as Keith mentioned, you know, I just sit around. And I did think that this was going to be relatively easy. Boy, was I wrong. First off, my biggest issue was, as someone who's lived here for 35 years, I came up with like 160 things to do right away. And then I felt like, how do you call the list down to 100? That was very difficult. And then on top of everything else, COVID hit. So here I am trying to write this book about places to go, restaurants, you know, venues, cultural venues, and they're all closed. And I couldn't get a hold of anybody. Most everybody was closed. It was a difficult thing to pull off, but I did finish it. And it was published in April of this year, and it's doing extremely well. It's on the bestseller list on Amazon. You can pick it up there, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. I have a lot of people who said they're buying it and putting it in the glove box of their car. So if anybody says there's nothing to do, you just pull it out and pick a page and there's no excuse, right? The book itself is broken into categories. So what do you think would be first for food and drink? It's got to be Pacos, you know? It's synonymous with Toledo. So in each of these sections, I go into what, if I can, about details about the history and the background. So it's not just go to Pacos, but you learn something new take a deep dive in Toledo through the book. I get into the usuals, as you can imagine. You wouldn't ever do a Toledo book without mentioning, for example, the zoo or the Toledo Museum of Art. Those are obvious, Lance, right? I mean, I can't leave those ones out, right? So what I try to do is also include some that you may never heard of. So I'd ask the question, how many people have been to the Spot in Oak Openings? Okay, we have one person, couple. How about the Popcorn Museum in Holland? Anybody? Okay, got one there. So it isn't just the same old, obvious ones. We're also trying to make sure that we're thinking about people who live in Toledo, have lived here all their lives. There's things out there that you probably haven't done. There's, I'm sure, things that you've probably taken for granted too. And you keep saying, yeah, I'll get there one of these days. So that's the whole premise of the book. And there's 100 things to do. That's available on Amazon, online. You can also check it out at holytoledohistory.com. I mentioned the third thing I'm working on are these GPS tours. What they essentially do is use a GPS in your phone. You download an app called Voice Map for free, and then it tells you where you're at and then shows you what tours are available. So most recently, the few that I've done that have been most successful have been this first one, History Along the Maumee. And we take you from essentially in front of the Owens Corning headquarters here downtown, all the way down the river to Grand Rapids. We cross the river and we bring you all the way back through Perrysburg and East Toledo. And along the way, this takes about 5.5 to 6 hours. And I tell people, pack a picnic, take your family, get out of the car, enjoy it. It's not meant for you to just drive. It's actually kind of an all-day event to learn about the military history, the cultural history, American Indian history, everything that's covered within that geographic space. We try to cover as quickly as we can, and we do it in about 5.5, 6 hours. The next one, it's getting ahead of me again, sorry. The next one is one that I originally wrote for the Valentine Theater a few years back, and then we actually did it live in buses for the Toledo History Museum, and that's the Unholy Toledo Tour. It's a gangster tour. It's downtown. We tell you the Lickavoli and Kennedy story. We hit all the spots, the hits, where the hits took place, where the robberies took place. We show you where the slot machines were made. It's really a fun tour. This one is about 2 hours. And during the height of COVID last year, when this first came out, we had as many as 5,000 people take this on a Saturday. And because they didn't have anything else to do, and they could sit in their car with their family and do something and be outside. So they were really excited about it. And then lastly, Ted Ligabell and I just finished this on Friday, and it launched on Friday. And this is a 3-part walking tour of the Old West End. And as you walk, you'll hear us describe the homes, who were the builders, who were the designers, who lived in the homes. And then Ted does a terrific job talking about the generations who really built the Old West End. So it's not just all architecture, but the people, the culture of the Old West End, and how it is what it is today. And then last, I'll just mention, as I mentioned earlier, the Toledo, holytoledohistory.com. I have 3 projects working on right now. One is called Remarkable Spaces in the 419. I'm working with Matthew McNulty, who's a architectural and design photographer who just moved here from Los Angeles, and mostly shoots famous people's homes. I mean, he goes to France, he goes to the south of France, to LA, to New York, and he photographs the interiors, and so they end up in magazines and other places. He's going to photograph, and I'm going to write the local history, and we're doing remarkable spaces in the 419, from homes to barns to churches. It really doesn't matter to us as long as it has a backstory. And then I'm also working with Art Weber. Maybe you know Art, he's been a photographer for the Metro Parks for 50 years. Art and I are doing a book on the history of the Maumee River. And that book is going to be available in 2023. Matthew and I, the first book, Remarkable Spaces, will be available next year. And if you're into Instagram, you can check us out at Remarkable 419 or at the Holy Toledo History. So I was told to leave a few minutes for questions. Do we still have time for that?
Yes. So if anybody has questions, please come up to a floor. We will probably also pull a couple of questions if there are any from the chat room and Zoom. Any questions? Wow. I'd have to say that's very good, Ted. Nice, nice.
Here we go.
All righty, so we do have a few questions from our Zoom audience of members. They are finding your presentation most interesting.
Good. I hope nobody wants dates. You start talking about history and everybody wants to know, hey, what year did that happen? And I'm the last person in the world to do that.
First question here from is, as a resident, what was the biggest or most surprising find?
In the 100 things to do, I think, and I tell this and people go, well, they think it's strange, but I really consider myself to be a Metro Parks connoisseur. I had no idea they offered tree climbing. Did anybody here know that? I had no idea. There you go, tree climbing and also archery. So it was a discovery for me, and I've already signed up my grandson, and we're going to do the archery.
Bob Savage asks, what is your favorite underseen spot in Toledo?
I think one that people really don't think about much is the Alvar on the Maumee River, on River Road, just after you side cut Metro Park. Are you guys familiar with the area I'm talking about? So what's the road that comes down and meets it on the hill that goes up to Fort Meigs or Fallen Timbers? Anybody remember? Anyway, this is located right off side cut, and its Alvar is a specific kind of eco environment where in July the water recedes, and then you have basically the bottom of the river, and then you have lichen and all kinds of other things start to form that they don't form anywhere else. It's because of this micro kind of environment, and you can walk out there, and it's an incredible view of the Maumee. You're looking straight down towards Waterville, and you just get this fantastic view. So that's one of my, I guess, hidden spots, because people fly by on River Road and have no clue what they're walking by or driving by. Yes, sir. So I started with, right off the bat with about 160, and then it actually grew because I started looking at the categories they had, and I probably ended up with a list of 200. And of course, the publisher was like, that's great, we'll do a second volume. So I guess that's what we'll do someday. I had the same situation with Forgotten Visitors. I did the research, and I ended up with probably about 40 people that I thought had an interesting backstory. The only problem was, I did those first 23. I tried to go back, and I was kind of bored with the rest of them because they didn't match up. So, yes, sir.
How were you able to find your source material?
Good question. The source material came from a lot of different places. But I tell people all the time, the main library is an incredible tool and resource for this community. And the local history department, the staff are second to none, any way they can. And then, to be honest, the internet was incredible. You have to be careful. A real quick story, when I was doing the story about Sarah Bernhardt, I stumbled onto this story that she left Toledo to go to Ann Arbor for a private presentation on Christmas Eve, and her show was on Christmas Day. Well, she turns around and the train gets snowed in somewhere off of Route 23 south of Ann Arbor, and they spend the night in the train covered in snow. This story goes on and on and on. I found it in the Michigan Historical Society Journal from 1988. This is like a 10-page piece. And I'm like, this is a gold mine. I was just so excited. And I wrote it all up and got excited. And about a month before we published the book, I started doing some other research and realized the dates didn't jive. So then I started doing some more research and find out the whole thing was made up. So I tracked down the guy who wrote it. He was a professor, history professor up in Michigan. And by this time he had retired. He moved to Washington State. And I actually got him on the phone. And he said, he goes, yeah, sorry about that, but don't let a good story get in the way of facts,
President Alex, do we have time for one more? Nope, all righty. As a reminder, everyone, since we are back in person, if in the future your questions could come to the floor mic, that would be fantastic, so our Zoom listeners could hear them.
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Hold on. Ted, don't go anywhere yet. I want to definitely thank him for a very enlightening and informative presentation. And this is the first time I've ever got to hand a book to our speaker, okay? It is Historical Tales of Toledo, written by a Rotarian, past president Rotarian. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great presentation. There's one more gift too. We're going to make a donation in your name to the Polio Plus Fund. So now, one of the moments we've all been waiting for, past President Chuck Mann to deliver a special presentation.
I will try and be respectful of your time, but this takes a little bit of an introduction. For many years, the Toledo Rotary Foundation sponsored an annual fundraiser called It's a Ball. The brainchild of then member Kathy Tate, It's a Ball shows raised over $100,000 each year to fund what were called transformational projects, like the $300,000 that was donated to the Metro Parks for the shelter, our shelter at the Middle Grounds. Each year, a different It's a Ball theme was chosen. We did Saturday Night Live, we did Hollywood Squares, we did a talent show, and there were others as well. But the 2008 show was an homage to the long-running NBC TV show called Laugh-In. Thanks to the folks at Two Scale, the stage was a recreation of the famous joke wall. What happened in front of the wall was magic, but what happened behind the wall was another thing. Rotarians were recruited to deliver jokes that Tom Walton and I supplied. We had two rehearsals, and they were not well attended. We asked the cast to wait until after their performance to fully enjoy the hospitality of the Pinnacle, but most of them did not honor that request. And one more thing to add, this is sort of neat. The video that you're about to see features 3 legendary Rotarians that are no longer with us. Since this is the first meeting after the holiday, let this serve as a lighthearted memorial to them and all the departed members of our club. Enjoy.
Hey, Kathy! Kathy! Oh, hi. I understand the mayor has a new brainstorm.
What is it?
He wants to send deaf Marines to guard the airport.
Yo, Tom! Yeah, Joe! Oh, who do you think's gonna be the next president?
Hey, I'm not paid to think. I'm paid to write a column.
Sock it to me! Hey, Ann!
Yeah, Chuck.
I just got high-speed internet.
Like it?
Well, it crashes a lot faster.
Hey, Ann, do you like your computer?
Sure. There's one problem, though. I keep hitting the escape key, and I'm still here.
Hey, Joe! Joe, you there?
Give me a second, will you?
Hey, get out of here. Hey, Joe, you know that Jim Hartung? He's not here tonight, but he's a heck of a guy. You know that? And they still remember him fondly at his old high school, South Chicago High.
You know, I gotta be honest, I'm afraid to ask why.
Well, he's the first kid from the school to pass driver's education and sex education in the same 1949 DeSoto.
Hey, Debbie. Yeah? I understand that when Hunt Sears earned his varsity letter in high school, his girlfriend had to read it to him.
Danny, where are you?
I'm here, Andy.
Did you hear about that Clint Bott?
What about him?
Well, when he was in high school, he wanted to go out for the debate team. but they talked him out of it. Talk to me. Talk it to me. Talk it to me.
Hey, Tom,
Yeah, Kathy?
That Helen Milanos, she's a great businesswoman, but a lousy cook.
Now, how do you know that?
I heard that the flies chipped in to fix her screen door last summer.
Hey, Joe! Give me a little room here. Use a breath saver. That mayor of ours is really something. No, hold on a second. All right, I'm feeling better now. Hold on. All right. You're still here. Mayor of ours is really something else.
Got that right.
I bet that if Carney was around in Moses' time, we'd have a lot more than 10 commandments today.
Tom,
Yeah, Sally.
wait. Did you know that if you give a man a fish, he can eat for a day? But if you teach a man to fish, he can sit in a boat and drink beer all day.
I was supposed to get that line. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Tom, whoa.
What is it? Good grief.
Is it true that you were John Block's yes man?
You know, I am so sick and tired of that question. I was not John Block's yes man. When John Block said no, I said no too.
Where's my cue card? Talk it to me. Whew, it's hot back there. Tony, hey, yo, Tony. Now where are Oh, hi, Joe.
Hold on a second.
I'll tell you something about Chuck Stockton that you didn't know. Really? About Chuck?
Yeah, hold on. Wait, turn the page. Oh, yeah. He doesn't know this, but he had a gambling problem.
Really? Was it bad? You need
Yes.
the glasses, Joe?
No, it was really bad. Gamblers Anonymous bet him 2-1 that he wouldn't make it.
Hey, Ann. Ann. Yeah, Joe's in the way.
Yeah.
Do you know why politicians are proof of reincarnation?
No, why?
Because you just can't get that screwed up in one lifetime.
Debbie!
Yeah.
Debbie! Here I am again!
Hi.
Does killing time damage eternity? Come on, you guys, you gotta get that one. Hey, Joe! You never know where he's going up here. Joe!
Oh, yeah, Tom.
How come we sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game when we're already there?
Hey, Kathy! Did you know that with the Pentagon, they got 5 sides to every story?
Hey, Tom,
Yeah, Chuck.
did you hear about the dyslexic
The-
devil
the-
worshiper?
the what?
The dyslexic devil with him?
Dyslexic?
Yeah.
Say it
that's the-
backwards.
No, that's the word. He sold his soul to Santa.
Hey, Kathy.
Yes.
You know what? I'm really concerned about John Wasserman's intelligence.
Why is that?
Because I heard the last time he had a blood test, he studied for it.
Hey, Joe, you're supposed to be calling me now. Oh, I did it again. Joe!
Yes?
I heard you had a problem up at the border in Windsor last week.
You know, Tony, my wife's in the audience.
She have a problem too, Joe?
Yeah, you know, the Border Patrol asked me if I was carrying any firearms. I said, yeah, what do you need?
Debbie,
Yeah, Clint?
something bothering me.
What's that?
When you shoot a mime,
Ooh, nice rap.
when you shoot a mime with a gun, you have to use a silencer.
Hey, Tom,
Yeah, Ann, what's wrong?
I'm really depressed.
Why is that?
I was playing poker the other night with a deck of tarot cards. I got a full house and 4 people died.
Ann?
Yeah,
Ann,
Tom, yeah, I'm crying.
you think you're depressed? I poured spot remover on my dog, and he disappeared.
Oh, boy, those were the fun days. Let's get back to some fun in Rotary. Okay, so thank you, Chuck. Thank you for that. Next week, Monday, June 14th, Randy Gardner, Chancellor of Ohio Department of Higher Education. There is one committee meeting after today's meeting, and it is right here in the main dining room, membership engagement. It is so great to see everybody's faces at in-person live meetings. Have a great week, everybody.
For over 100 years, Rotary members have taken action when challenges arise. We know what people can do when they come together and put others before themselves.
The team lead said they will continue the campaign to fight against the coronavirus.
Local Rotary clubs deliver food and supplies to people in need.
Strangers become friends, helping hands multiply, and problems turn into solutions. We are Rotary. We are people of action. Learn more at rotary.org/action.